good morning, afternoon, depending on which time of Europe you are, everyone. So thank you so much for joining in. There's still some people in the waiting room, but we are going to begin. So thank you for being here in this webinar for the long-term operation of nuclear power plants, which will be based in the new position paper that the European Nuclear Society has launched yesterday. It's available in all the platforms. I know Mattia will send the link through the chat, but you can find it in social media, in the website. So that's your reference for today. We are so happy to see many of you here and thank you for registering. We have a lot of registration, which is always a positive thing to see that this topic is interesting for you as it's relevant as many nuclear power plants in Europe are approaching their original design lifetime. So let me just start quickly by explaining how this webinar is going to be. The idea is simple. We don't want you to read all the paper and to have to read all the paper or to put like a half an hour presentation reading piece by piece the paper. So you have the position paper. It will be available for you. You can read it later, but that's not what we are doing here today. We will do a short presentation on the main topics and ideas and conclusions by our author that I will introduce later. And then we will start like an interview, a discussion, questions and answer by me and our dear author about these main topics and main position and frequently asked questions. And then finally, you will be able to ask your questions through the chat of this meeting. So please feel free to write them as they appear in your mind. And later on, we will discuss them with the author. So with no further ado, we will begin. So let me introduce you to our dear author today, which is Christoph. Christoph is the Technical Director and Nuclear Research and Development Manager at Tractebel, with over 3 decades of experience in nuclear engineering, reactor physics, safety assessment, and applied research. Since 2019, he has been responsible for coordinating nuclear R&D activities, with a strong focus on LTO, small modular reactors, and strategic roadmap of the company. He has a PhD in fluid mechanics and numerical simulation from the Université Catholique de Louvain, as he has a long-standing background in applied research both in Europe and the US. But more importantly, he is a member of the High Scientific Council of the European Nuclear Society, which is an independent body composed of senior experts from across the European nuclear sector, whose role is to provide science-based and non-political advice on strategic issues related to nuclear energy. They develop position papers, such as the one launched in today's webinar, of course, to support informed decision-making by policymakers, regulators, the industry, and society. And in this webinar, he's going to be talking as he's one of the main authors of the ENS position paper on long-term operation. So without further ado, Christoph is going to guide us through this position paper with some slides.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. I would like also to thank you and Mattia and the ENS in general to give me the chance to speak on behalf of my colleagues about the LTO, which, as you did in the let's say the introductory part, is some kind of a hot topic for the time being. So I will launch my presentation right now, and at the same time trying to share my screen. At least when we tried to do this before, it worked. So, well, I hopefully this time display settings. Ah, I missed that one. This one, display settings. Well, I hope that you see the, let's say, okay, so yeah, so well, in order to introduce the topic, I prepared 3 slides, let's say, summarizing somehow some key messages that I think relevant to share in this LTO context. The first one sets some kind of the background. I'm sure that most of you are aware of the energy dilemma that Europe is facing. because in fact we are undergoing a fast transformation driven by electrification, decarbonisation, and geopolitical instability. And all the energy transition plans rely on electricity as a backbone of its climate, industrial, and energy security strategy. So there are three facts worth to be mentioned. The first, it's basically the huge growth in demand for the electricity, digital infrastructures, heat pumps, electrifications of transportation, and electrification of the heavy industry, which requires, let's say, a huge amount of reliable and low carbon electricity. At the same time, there is the distribution grid with its stability, which should be affordable and ensure the security of supply. And because of this growth, the grid is basically under pressure because of its historical background and some under investments in some places. The growth of renewable intermittency, permitting bottlenecks, and again geopolitical instability. And something which is in the background is that, of course, to face all those challenges, new infrastructure should be built and have to be built. However, the way those cannot be built fast enough in order to be synchronized somehow with the electrification growth needs. So basically, new assets of any kind will have a specific timeline in order to, let's say, contribute to this challenge. So, in a nutshell, I think all of us are, let's say, will agree on the fact that Europe must electrify faster, keep energy affordable and secure, and upgrade its grid. But of course, this creates a structural tension between what we are capable to do right now and what are the targets. The, let's say, difference between stability and intermittency, and most of all, the dependence of the energy supply and the goals of sovereignty that EU has in its roadmap. Now, in this framework, long-term operation of existing units is really one of the important parts of the EU electrification strategy. The demand is rising, fossil imports are insecure and costly, and renewables are expanding, but they have some constraints. And of course, grid infrastructure in some places is not keeping pace. So we can consider that there is a risk that the system is losing firm capacity, struggling with delivery bottlenecks, and facing strategy needs to secure reliable, low-cost carbon assets. So in this context, long-term operation, so extending the lifetime of the existing nuclear plants, it's not an option, but it's an essential pillar in the strategy. So, in fact, if you consider their impact on industry, economic, and geopolitical consideration, the LTO protects these advantages at minimal costs. So, I hope that you can read the table, which somehow compares, let's say, what is the problem, what is the challenge, the current status, and why LTO is, let's say, pertinent answer to that. So if you consider loss of firm low carbon capacity, so, well, 25% of EU is produced by nuclear, and it's clear that early retirements will create a capacity cliff, or let's say some kind of a dead valley if it's not compared with. And LTO will preserve on the same time 35 gigawatts and more of clean baseloads at very low LCOE. Now, if you plan assumptions versus delivery reality, all those new projects are facing delays. Could be renewables, grid storage, new nuclear, while the demand is rising. But the existing assets are there. So the running existing units offer by LTO immediate scalable capacity to stabilize the transition. And considering the strategic value of the assets, we need in Europe to strengthen our sovereignty, the stability of the affordability of clean energy, and maintain in operation the current nuclear plants will protect those through LTO, those existing strategic assets, and will support system resilience. Now, there is a debate on, well, what is LTO? Is it really something which we can rely on? And in fact, the position paper we wrote is explaining why LTO operation, while being a strategic importance for EU transition, it's also a very mature and globally practiced process. It's not new, it's well known, and it's a well-established, structured, proven engineering, regulatory, and economic framework in active deployment worldwide. So it's a safety-driven current solution, and which is precisely the kind of solution answer that EU needs to address its electrification challenge. So considering the maturity of the technical solutions, we have decades of operation, proven aging management frameworks. In terms of regulation, it's extremely well codified through guidances at international level, EU directives, national licensing experience. In terms of economically competitive, well, extending the lifetime of the existing units presents a very low LCOE. And of course, because it's already installed, it's already in the grid, it shows the lowest system costs per megawatt hour on firm power preserved. It's strategically indispensable in terms of sovereignty, resilience, and security of supply. It's immediately deployable because there are no permitting delays, no multi-year construction, but of course we need to go through the LTO process. And it's aligned with the EU long-term energy planning, with the Nuclear Alliance targets. And so don't remember the acronym for the, well, the pink is the Nuclear Illustrative Program. So beyond providing a short-term bridge, considering all those benefits, LT also ensures a critical long-term strategic capability for the EU, because it will secure skilled workforce and preserve industrial know-how by, let's say, keeping operational a mature supply chain and industrial ecosystem. So those are the three key messages that I wanted to share with you before, let's say, entering into the discussion. And so, well, I think the next part of the webinar will allow to give more details about those three key messages. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph. That was very enlightening and quite fast. So let's deep in these details through the questions. So first of all, and to give a little bit of context on why this position paper and one now, I wanted to ask you what prompted the High Scientific Council to publish this position paper right at this moment.
Well, of course, we think it is really the right time because, well, Europe, it's at the same time looking in updated national pathways. We know that, of course, there is some revision at EU level of the nuclear outlook. And we are also we have the feeling that we are facing short-term adequacy and industrial sovereignty risks. And those are exactly the points where LTO can de-risk the transition. And so the High Scientific Committee wanted to produce a scientifically grounded clarification why LTO and new builds are complement, and in order to make sure that in terms of key policy and public decisions, those would be at some point well informed before they will be taken. So I think it's the right time to issue a position paper on the LTO.
I think so. And looking at Europe's energy transition in a nutshell, what is the real risk of delaying these LTO decisions?
Yeah. Well, in fact, there are multiple risks. I don't see only one risk because you know that basically the transition is relying on the three pillars: sustainability, affordability, and sovereignty. So if you delay LTO, there is only one single risk. In fact, you somehow fragilize each one of those three pillars in different ways, because it will simultaneously jeopardize reliability, affordability, the decarbonization as well, industrial competitiveness, and of course, geopolitical security. And we think and we demonstrate that there is no real alternative which can fill the gap in time. So if you look at the capacity gap, well, in the paper, I just put the graph from Pink, which compares the evolution of electricity production, considering no LTO, LTO, and new builds. And you see that if you delay LTO decision, you will risk the premature loss of about 30 gigawatts or more of firm low carbon capacity across Europe before 2035. And this will, of course, have an impact, which I consider to be some kind of a carbon backslide that will undermine the 2030 and 2040 decarbonization goals. Because it's the one, LTO gives the largest high certainty near-term sources of CO2 abatement in Europe. And so if you are not considering those, you will have to replace the production by gas power. Most of the time, that's let's say, the shortest time solution, even though there could be, let's say, development in the grid, development on renewables. But at some point, this will increase the system costs and consumer price volatility. And in terms of capacity preservation, you will lose nuclear workforce and supply chain continuity, which will create what I consider a dangerous valley before new build will arrive. Even if you accelerate the SMR large reactor programs, they will take time to be there. So basically, if you delay LTO, you will weaken the energy security and you will increase our geopolitical exposure by all the reasons that I explained before. So there is only one single risk. I think it's the total picture, which in our position could be considered to be jeopardized by, let's say, delaying or not considering LTOs. So it's of prime importance to ensure the energy transition and to meet the targets which were assigned by 2030 and 2040.
Totally. I think you couldn't be more right. So moving on to a little bit of what we like to call in the Spanish young generation, debunking myths, and especially about LTO, there's, despite decades of operating experience, there's a concept which is the design lifetime, this famous 40 years, that is widely perceived today as a safety limit. So it's from a technical and also from a regulatory perspective, does the position paper address this section?
Oh yes, of course. I strongly recommend for those to read this position paper, because it addresses the misconception that the design lifetime equals an intrinsic safety boundary. Of course, many national regulations do not use design lifetime as an ultimate limit, and plants can continue to be in a safe operation as long as what we call the periodic safety reviews confirm compliance with the modern safety standards. In fact, LTO is defined as operation beyond the previously established time frame, provided the comprehensive safety case supports it. So LTO redefines the design lifetime as an initial economic engineering. It's an assumption. It's not a safety boundary. That has been done in the past. And what we write in our position paper is that we establish that the PSR, the periodic safety review, it's a mechanism that raises safety standards relative to early stages of operation. So the periodic safety reviews at LTO evaluates the plan not only against its original design basis, but also against state-of-the-art international safety standards, EIA, WENRA, and so on. So which includes aging management, operating experience, new research, and updated regulatory expectations. So in fact, the design lifetime, it's not let's say a safety boundary. It's an initial assumption which has been revisited, and which is revisited by well-structured periodic safety reviews which address all the safety considerations of let's say continuing the planned operation.
I hope all the audience was taking notes to pass this message, because it's very important. And moving on with the myths, from outside the sector, sometimes you can hear that NTO is lower standards and older plants, but in practice, you and I know it's the opposite. So based on what's reflected in this paper, would it be accurate to say that LTO programs typically lead to an upgrading of safety standards compared to the initial operating phase?
Yeah. Well, we can talk hours about LTO benefits, but we do not have much time about it. But you have to consider that LTO, it's not just maintaining the plan longer. And what the paper, let's say, highlights that LTO is a structured, regulator supervised process that requires aligning aging plants with modern safety standards, which leads to systematically higher safety standards than during the original design period. So this is I would say the DNA of the LTO process. It's to upgrade the plan with a safety case, which is significantly strengthened compared to the plan's original configuration. And it's not an accident. It's inherent on how LTO is conceived and regulated, justified, and implemented. because LTO will require the full reassessment of the plant design against today's safety work. And of course, you have in the paper the definition of what the review is to make sure that we need to, the design, taking into account the improvements made over time, still meets the level of safety requested by society today, not 40 years ago, today. And LTO is followed by identification and implementation of design improvements. So if you look at the safety reference, the reference point shifts from plant's original licensing basis to modern international standards, necessarily leading to systematic plant upgrades. And of course, because LTO will require, let's say, aging management, test, and inspection programs, there is an evolution in those different methodologies and techniques. And so those, let's say, programs did not exist or were much less developed in the initial licensing period. So which means that the post-LTO operation phase is supported now by much more sophisticated and comprehensive oversight tools. And at some point, there are also new methods and methodologies like periodicity safety assessment, modeling of hazards, the upgrades, for instance, with the inline PSR updates. So all those methodologies were not part of the early generation licensing basis. So it's totally incorrect to see that LTO it's lower standards for all the plants. It's totally the opposite. And I hope that the paper will help to clarify this very important point.
Sure, totally. So we have these 2 points. LTO, we can go beyond 40 years. It's not a safety hazard, and it's totally safe as it operates the safety of our nuclear power plants. So moving on to a different topic, the paper, one of the things that struck me the most is that it was very explicitly that LTO and new build of nuclear power plants should not be treated as competing options. So from the system and policy perspective, why did you make that distinction so critical?
Well, in fact, LTO and new builds are the two components of the tools needed for the transition. So they should not be treated as competitors. Those are not competitive options. And it's not a message that I'm giving. I think it's some kind of a system design principle that has to be taken into consideration. Because LTO will secure the present situation. We talked about capacity, losses, and so on. So LTO will preserve the present, but it means that the new build will secure the future. Because, of course, we need somehow to ensure the current situation and to prepare for the future at the same time. So the two plans, LTO and new builds, are to be planned as complements, not competitors. And let's say the highest benefit of this is that it will, at the end of the day, minimize the total system cost, because it will smooth at the same time the carbon pathway that I explained before. It will diversify the delivery risk, because LTO, it's well known. There are, let's say, the aging programs. There are some already, let's say, well-known technical safety and regulation solutions, and it will also sustain the skills and supply chain, and of course, it will strengthen the policy durability. So, from a power system and a public policy vantage point, I think that keeping LTO and new builds as complementary levers, it's critical. And I have listed 8 reasons, but I don't think I have time to mention those. But I would say that quickly going, we are looking at complementarity. Yeah, I think it's right. So the capacity adequacy now and later. So we are preserving now and we, let's say, fill the gap. We minimize the system costs, and it will hopefully have a positive impact on the consumer bills, because LTO is typically the lowest levelized cost of firm low carbon electricity. You have also to consider that in terms of CO2, the CO2 abatement trajectory will be preserved because it's an immediate abatement. Each gigawatt which is kept online avoids backfilling most of the time with fossil power, while available renewables will scale. So it will take time, and in point of view, it protects short-term the carbon budget. And it's also important to consider the risk diversification, because you have the two. The LTO are a well-known process, while let's say that new builds, however, there will be some improvements in the deployment. It's still some kind of let's say a more stringent project than LTO with respect to delivery, to licensing, and so on. So, well, there are many reasons to say that the two projects, in terms of the policy implication, should be integrated together. You have to consider LTO and new builds, and in order to let's say to work on the two timeframes, short term and long term.
Okay, so you've mentioned it, but just so that our audience gets this message, if Europe only did like new build and no LTO at all, what would be the practical consequence in one sentence for the electricity system on the medium term?
In one sentence.
In one
It's
sentence.
difficult. The sentence is, I would say, if you just deny LTO, you will create what I call the dangerous valley before the new build arrives. Then you will, at the same time, you will jeopardize, I mentioned all the risks related to not doing the LTO program. But if you are just only considering new builds, there will be a gap between the two. And in order to perform new build, you will need workforce, licensing, supply chain, and so on. And LTO is one of the components which will ensure that all those components are still operational when time will come to, let's say, enter into intensive new build program. Well, it was not one sentence, but
No, but it was good enough. So let me take this now to a little more personal level, because I'm guessing you're familiar with the case of Spain. In Spain, we are now in the cross path of doing LTO or carrying on with our current shutting down plan for the nuclear power plants. So looking specifically at Spain and the current national energy climate plan pathway, there is an assumption that the early nuclear phase out does not jeopardize these decarbonisation objectives we were talking about. So from a system behavior and emissions perspective, is that assumption technically robust, or do we have some homework to do?
It's a tricky question, because well, I'm not very well, let's say, involved in the details. I mean, in the details of the NCAP, let's say, in Spain. All that I know, and if I make the, let's say, the link with the Belgian situation that I know much better. Basically, well, I think that relying on massive variable renewable energy and storage expansion, on the paper it's right, but I'm a bit worried about the scale and the timing, because, well, I think that the scale, it's really unprecedented, and I think there is some kind of a huge execution risk. Of course, it's clear that you can, especially in Spain, ensure that the daytime variable renewable energy dominance is plausible, but delays are likely. And I would consider that keeping nuclear online is some kind of an insurance policy to make sure that facing the risks of, let's say, because the NCAP implicitly requires perfect execution of storage grids, renewable build out, and it could be unrealistic in some points if consider complex European permitting and supply chain contexts. So I think keeping nuclear online would be some kind of a safety insurance, just to make sure in case of everything goes wrong. And of course, well, you had a specific event quite recently in Spain. And so I won't get into the details because basically I don't know them. But it's not an error, a mistake to say that in any case, the system level risk of reducing synchronous inertia, it remains real and grows as nuclear is removed. So, of course, if you are considering the system part, blackout and system stability concerns, usually all studies show that nuclear closures reduce synchronous generation when grids increasingly rely on inverted-based renewables. So, okay, you can rely on those, but I think it's very strong assumption. In terms of decarbonization, the answer is quite easy because if you are removing nuclear, I don't know how fast clean renewables will be there to replace firm nuclear. And we see that most of the time you compensate with gas-backed VRE plants. And unless, of course, storage and grid reinforcements are delivered at extraordinary scale, which again is a strong assumption. So I don't know how much strong the supply chain, the development chain in Spain is. But usual experience in such huge projects shows that there are always delays, there are always problems, even permitting and so on. So, okay, if you consider the usual, say, don't put your eggs in the same basket, I would strongly recommend to keep your nuclear units, let's say, operational as long as licensing possible.
I think you said everything that needed to be said, so thank you. And moving back to the LTO and the technical position paper, the paper, if you read it, it's super clear that it's not only a technical exercise, but a challenge of several dimensions involving safety, regulatory compliance, economics, public trust. So from your perspective, which of these dimensions is currently the most critical to get right and why?
Uh, well, I think the most critical dimension is really the one with, I would say it's the safety part. Because not because it's a challenge, but it's the perception of the safety insurance, and also for the credibility that flows from it. Because it is the safety insurance perception by the population is the most critical dimension to get, because all the others, economic, the public trust, and let's say the policy feasibility, depends on its solidity. While failure in this area will immediately and irreversibly shut down the possibility of the LTO program. So I think that LTO only exists if basically the safety case is watertight, and that the population is convinced that the safety case is watertight. That it's not a purely economic, let's say, life extension at any price. No, safety is first, and I just remind that in the PSR process, safety, it's the very, very important pillar of, let's say, ensuring LTOs. So we need to be, in terms of public trust, to be convinced that if there is a LTO and the unit which is in extension of lifetime, because it satisfies all the safety criteria, not the ones that I did mention before for its construction, but the ones that are prevailing right now for the safety of the public.
Let me just quickly say, because I see some hands up in the audience, you cannot use your camera or your microphone, so we will have a Q&A brief time slot. So please write the questions in the chat so that we can answer them properly, but please don't raise your hands because you won't be able to use your microphone. Thank you. And going back to these questions, considering this safety assurance, which is based in several factors, so agent management, supply chain constraints, workforce, also it's important, technological upgrades. Do you believe that here in Europe, so our nuclear sector ecosystem is sufficiently prepared to support all these LTO at the scale that is required?
Again, it's a difficult question to answer because I think that if you consider globally at EU, I would say that it's the case, but the margin it's very, very, very small. But if you are considering a country by country configuration, there might be differences. So I won't get into the details, but for instance, if you consider that if you are in a lifetime extension of sites with multiple units, this could be kind of a challenge, perhaps in terms of workforce, but also of licensing capacities and so on. So I think that it's also part of, let's say, the purpose of the paper. It's to let's say make growing the awareness that we need to be prepared for LTOs because it's quite important. We have the capacities, but we have to make sure that those capacities will be there on due time. And so there are different, let's say, conditions that should be taken into consideration in terms of policies in order to secure that LTO, it's really one important pillar in the transition, and this pillar should be preserved by all means. So yeah, it's about the answer to your question. It's not definite. So I would say, yeah, we are capable to do that. Are we prepared today, fully prepared? I think could do better in terms of, let's say, regulations and so on, and policies. But the capacity is there. It should be preserved.
Okay, good answer. So, and beyond this technical demonstration and these capabilities, how do you think, how critical is this transparent communication and building in maintaining the public confidence and trust around LTO decisions?
I mentioned it a bit before. In fact, the public awareness of what LTO is exactly, I think it's quite important, and it's a question of legitimacy. to explain that LTO is a well-structured, as I said before, well-structured process supported by regulations and updated regulations. And so, because there is a risk that the public cannot distinguish between rigorously justified LTO from a political or economic driven decision. And so we are now in a situation where it's very important to give a message and to, let's say, embark, let's say, the population, to embark the public in the fact that recognizing LTO and recognizing nuclear as a transition, as a key component of the transition, we cannot do it on our side alone. We need to embark the public trust. So transparency, I think, it's very important in the planning, in the policies, to make sure that, let's say, all the stakes are well understood and well accepted.
I agree. And that's why everyone should read the position paper on LTO, for instance, and that's why we do this kind of activities. So it's key for me. So just finish up with my side of the questions. If you have to distill this position paper into a few takeaways, into a key message, what will be your key message to countries that are hesitating on LTO and to the members or our audience here engaging in this debate across Europe? What should they take into account from this paper?
I would say first message, read it.
That good one.
Read the paper, talk about it. And I think that for me, the key message is that, well, it's the purpose of the paper. LTO is important for the transition. We cannot afford not doing LTO. That's something that we cannot, if we want to meet our goals, it's, I would say, mandatory to embark LTOs. But of course, the key message is also that LTO is a well-proven process, but supported by up-to-date, let's say, safety requirements. So I would say perhaps not all units might not be eligible for the LTOs, because basically current safety standards would perhaps require too much investments. So there is a balance to be found between the two. So LTO will be, hopefully it will be really understood, will be justified and supported by the regulations.
Thank you. And this makes the ends of my questions. So now the audience could make you all the questions they have about the position paper or LTO. So we can begin because I see there are already some questions in the chat. So let me read them out loud. Juan Manuel Garcia Franco asks if regulatory frameworks and licensing present serious challenges for EU states, even for an LTO scenario. Would it be viable for Europe, acting as a bloc, to establish a unified strategy to reduce or mitigate these lengthy processes? So in short, could the regulatory authorities align on this matter and create guidelines to facilitate the LTO?
Well, I'm not in a position to give an answer for that because I'm not working in the licensing authority. So I would say, yeah, it would be nice to have harmonization. But so perhaps in the policies, one of the key messages to say, yeah, put all the safety authorities talking together in order to have some kind of harmonization of the requirements. But still, we know that basically it's a national responsibility to define let's say, nuclear regulation principles, even though those are aligned to general rules, but we know by the details that there are differences by countries. So yeah, cannot do much about this.
Okay, thank you. We have a question that I think is for Mattia. Is this webinar going to be available online? I'm guessing yes, but if Mattia, you're there. Yes, we will publish the recording in the coming days. And meanwhile, visit the European Nuclear Society YouTube channel, which is in the chat. So moving on to a long question, could you please inform on the LTO plans for Belgium and EU units? Is it 60 or 80 years as in the US? What is the main point of looking for new technologies while LTO is still not so well experienced and looks not so attractive, I guess, in the EU? That's Igor Nazarov.
Okay, so there are multiple sub-questions. So about the duration, 60 or 80, I think that what has been said before, it's clear. You can operate as long as you will comply with the safety requirements from the periodic safety reviews and the LTO process. So there is no fixed limit. As long as you can justify and make sure that you will totally comply with the regulations in terms of safety, the safety standards prevailing by the day of LTO is submitted, there is no limitation. So this was the first part. So could you repeat the other parts of the question, because I missed all the others?
It was LTO plans for Belgium and European Union, 60 or 80 years, and why looking into new technologies if LTO is still not so experienced, which I guess you addressed.
I don't understand why you say LTO is not so experienced. So
then maybe start by that. I'm just reading the question.
Yeah, because in fact, LTO process, well, I did mention the LTO process is also a well-established industrial regulatory process. So, in fact, basically, well, of course, LTO will incorporate new technologies, and it mentioned that for, let's say, inspection, for, let's say, whatever would be necessary to meet the requirements. So new technologies will be implemented. That's why also, I did not mention it, but having in parallel R&D activities in order to, let's say, improve all those LTO supporting processes, it's also important for maintenance, for inspection, for, let's say, safety demonstration, or let's say whatever. So all things are not done right now. So it's a continuous improving process. So to be honest, I do not fully understand the question, but perhaps it would be better to talk with the person who asked the question to make sure that we fully understand each other. I'm not quite sure that I did answer to his or her question.
Yeah, and we do have some experience on going LTO, as if we understand it, beyond 40 years. In Europe, we have the Borssele plant in the Netherlands. We have, well, in fact, Spanish nuclear power plants are going beyond 40 years. Just a couple of years as today, but but we are going beyond, and so are the Belgian plants and US and France.
We had 3 units in Belgium which moved from 40 to 50 years. So and based on the same process, to just demonstrate that with respect to the prevailing safety criteria, there is a full compliance.
Yep. So, Igor, if you want to clarify something on your question, I'll be reading the chat. And next question is by Richard Ollington. Is there not a concern that insisting on a higher safety case for LTO than current operation, 1, raises the cost needlessly, and 2, leads to greater public concern by insisting that greater safety requirements for FTO? You are saying that current safety levels are inadequate. So it's similar to a public conservation plan that was in
Yeah,
post-Fukushima when the Japanese regulators require more safety
yeah.
regime and bring into question why this safety regime wasn't established before. So kind of this is what Richard is asking.
I would say it's a it's a predictable question. So, well, that's always the debate on how safe is an infrastructure, and of course, you have to agree on the fact that in terms of regulation, you need to integrate the feedback of experience and so on, and you cannot discard those. And if, let's say, experience shows that you have to reconsider some points of your design and so on under the line of, you know, new events or whatever, I think it's in the process. Safety first. Now, of course, at which price? Okay, the price is the one that will secure the population. And can you put a price on it? So, well, I don't think so. So, in fact, you need that to find the right balance, and that's why there is, let's say, exchanges between regulators and those who are, let's say, the regulators and operators, to make sure that we are fully aligned on what's needed on, let's say, the compliance with the safety requirements. So yeah, yeah, I did mention before, all units are perhaps not eligible for LTOs because if there are some new safety requirements which could at some point lead to, let's say, drastic changes in the design for high cost, then it's the balance to find between, let's say, extending the operation or let's say, doing investments somewhere else. I don't know if I did answer the question, but
Yes, I think you did. So next question by Ana Gonzalez. Uh, Hello, thanks for the talk, super interesting. One of the paper's recommendation relates to the EU taxonomy and sustainable finance. So from your perspective, how critical is the recognition of LTO as an eligible activity to enable timely investment decisions?
how critical? It's important. I don't know if it's critical, but it's quite important. But you have to be aware that in terms of investments and so on, we made big progress in the last 3 years. So in terms of recognition of what should be considered as investment, we made progresses. And so we see perhaps not enough, not strong enough, but we see that basically considering LTOs in the policies, it's making its way, and it's beginning to be part of, let's say, the investment programs. So we are not fully, well, it's not a full achievement, yes, but it's my personal point of view that we are in a good way.
Okay. We do have a follow-up on the question before by Igor. He said he was talking because in the European Union, before the full-scale Russian invasion in Ukraine, many nuclear units were, while governments were changed. Plans for LTO were surprisingly mixed and revised. So the main issue, we are looking for a strong LTO support and new projects, or we are still depending on the geopolitical disruptions.
That's one of the risks that we have because and you pointed right, Igor. Is it Igor, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You pointed right. Uh, Unfortunately, the time scale of nuclear activities, nuclear deployment, it's based on long term. and political decisions, and we know it by strong experience. Political decisions at some point lack long-term vision. I'm very cautious about this. Um, so that's why one of the recommendation is that LTO LTO and nuclear in general is considered in the long-term policies in order to make sure that there will not be changes of wind, if I can say so, considering the fact that if you change the government in one country, you say, okay, now it's moving from black to white and white to black, and so then we just collapse everything which has been done before. And that's especially important for nuclear activities which are based on the long term. So it's it's one of the most important risks that we are facing. It's, I would say, the political instability, which at some point should be strengthened and supported by long-term proactive vision.
Perfect. I hope Igor is happy with the answer. Next question is by Andrea Uribe. And she said, looking ahead, how realistic is to operate beyond 60 years in Europe, and what will need to be in place technically and regulatorily to make that possible?
Well, it's difficult for me to be honest, difficult for me to answer for that, because there are 2 points to be considered. First, in terms of, let's say, that's why perhaps R&D, that's one key point where R&D is still needed, because we need to enlarge our databases. We need to make sure that we can cover, let's say, longer operational times. And it's clear that at some point, the current return of experience, the current databases do not go so far. So that's why we do recommend that we still, R&D need to be still supported in order to, let's say, extend the understanding of the behaviors of different phenomena related to LTO for longer periods. So that's clearly what required. And on usually the regulatory part, if you are considering that you will justify, let's say, the safety criteria, you need to produce evidences and demonstration in order to convince the safety authorities that your safety case is sound and complete. So that's why the paper also calls for supporting R&D as some kind of a parallel process to make sure that we cover all the potential issues related to longer operational periods.
Yes, thank you. And Mattia pointed out that there's also another webinar from November that also talks about LTO from a purely technical point of view. So that could be interesting for our audience too. It's linked on the chat. So I encourage you to see that as well. But I really like your answer. And I think that's the end of today's question. No, last one. Eva said, from a purely technical standpoint, what are the real-life limiting components for LTO in existing reactors, and how well are these limitations understood today?
We have in Belgium a great experience. I would say the most limiting, not really limiting, but perhaps the one which somehow drives all the process is the reactor pressure vessel, because you can, of course, at some cost, replace most of the other components. but replacing the RPV, it's something which is much more difficult. So I would say, as long as you can demonstrate, let's say, the uh, the compliance of the RPV with the current structural criteria, it's okay. But once you have difficulties in demonstrating that the RPV it's not too brittle with respect to extending the operation, then I would say you need to find solutions for that.
Okay, perfect. So I think this is the end of the questions for today. I think we have a wide view of LTO now, and of course, the main message is read the position paper, as Christoph said. So thank you very much, all of you, to stay by this hour of webinar, and thank you, Christoph, for your time and explanations. I found they were marvelous. So, and thank you, of course, to the ENS for inviting me to moderate this seminar. And without further ado, have a good day. And if you have any questions, you can find me and Christoph on LinkedIn or also get in contact with the ENS. So have a great day.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I hope that I answered all your concerns and questions. And as Mia mentioned, so do not hesitate to contact us in case you have, let's say, very, very burning hot questions related to LTO.